In today's rapidly evolving digital landscape, remote staffing emerges as more than just a trend, it's the future of how businesses operate. Yet diving into the world of global staffing can be daunting. The unfamiliarity of the terrain, combined with the age-old fears of the unknown, keep many CEOs and business owners tethered to the traditional staffing models. The irony, by sticking to what they know, they're missing out on a world brimming with untapped talent and potential. So today, I will tell you what the 7 deadly sins of remote staffing are. And more importantly, I'll tell you how not to commit them. My name is Bill Keller, and I have over a decade of experience working with remote teams, and today I'm going to share my knowledge and experience with you. So the first deadly sin that we're going to talk about today of remote staffing is assuming that a degree means that they're qualified, and nothing could be further from the truth. And what we find is that not all universities and not all countries have the same type of rigorous requirements that we might have here in the US. And maybe you think that there's a large disparity between top universities in the US and what you might think as lower universities in the US, but across the world, that gap is even wider. Many people are seeking opportunities and they see education as a way to those opportunities. And so there's people out there, unscrupulous people, who are starting educational institutions to capitalize on that, and they're taking advantage of their students, and they're not giving them the education that they need or they deserve. And because of that, it can put you at risk. And so what you really need to understand is what does that education mean in that country? What is that institution? And really diving deep into that to understand, does it have a quality reputation? And more than that, what I tell people to do is, even if it has a quality reputation, is test. What do you need them to know? What do you need them to be able to do? And what are the testing protocols that you can set up to make sure that they're going to be able to do that for you? And this is a strategy whether you're working overseas or remotely, or whether you're working here in the States. I think that it's a strategy that you can employ and should employ. But I think it's even more important when you're working overseas. So just to kind of recap, don't assume that a degree means a quality education or a quality individual. And what are you going to do and how are you going to be able to test them? And if you work through that process, you're going to be able to avoid the first deadly sin of remote staffing. So moving on to the second deadly sin of remote staffing. And that is thinking that culture is not important. Oftentimes when we go into these positions, maybe you read a book like The 4-Hour Workweek like I did. Excellent book. And it talks about the great work that you can get done overseas, which is absolutely true. But it doesn't really talk about the cultural aspect very much, because oftentimes we think of competence, we think of reliability, we think of knowledge and skill, but we don't really think of culture and how it can affect the job that we're going to get. But I can tell you, after over a decade worth of experience in this industry, that culture plays a bigger part than probably any of those other things. And why is that? I don't quite know, but I can tell that it does have an impact. And so it's something that you need to keep in mind. So for example, in India, when we're working with people there, super respectful. And you're like, oh, what could be wrong with that? There's nothing wrong with that. But they are so respectful, and so they want to put you on a pedestal that they'll have a hard time bringing you difficult information. And so that's one of the flip side to that cultural element that you need to be aware of, because while they're super respectful, they might not want to bring you bad news. Nobody does. But in this particular case, not bringing you bad news can really mean a problem for you. And so understanding these small cultural implications is the difference between success and failure. It's the difference between okay work or average work and superior work. And so while it takes extra effort to reach across borders, to reach around the world and understand what that culture might look like, and you can use other agencies like ourselves that will help you to understand that, or you can do this yourself. It's going to take a little bit more time, and sometimes you might even have to go to that country if you have a large enough investment in that person or in that country and in those people. But I would encourage you to understand their culture, and to also to help them to understand your culture. It's an extra step that takes some extra time, but it can pay big dividends. And that, if you follow, will help you not to commit the second deadly sin of remote staffing. So the third deadly sin of remote staffing is starting a global remote hiring strategy without an internal champion. That champion might be you, but if you're not going to be involved on a daily basis in this strategy, then you need somebody else within your organization who catches the vision, who understands what you're trying to accomplish, and not just that, who is excited about working with people from overseas in another culture. So this person really needs to be an advocate for the person overseas and also for your internal team. He needs to say what your internal team needs so that there's clarity on both sides. So the remote staffing person, he understands what's required of him, but he also understands that there's going to be some grace as there's a learning process and there's a learning curve. And there needs to be this advocate who can bring these two parties together, because there's going to be some resistance, guaranteed. And you're going to learn more about that later. But this person is really the linchpin to make sure that your process goes from so-so to awesome. And they're going to be this advocate that you need. So make sure that you have an internal champion if you want to make sure that you don't commit the third deadly sin of remote staffing. So the fourth deadly sin of remote staffing is not communicating clearly. And many people think, oh, of course I communicate clearly. But if you've ever gone back to an email that you've written, you probably reread it and found that there was things in there that you didn't think were in there the first time. Maybe a misspelling, maybe a word here or there. But this can happen in your communications, especially working cross-culturally, where you're not as clear as you think you are. And that non-clarity, right, not being clear, can cause incredible problems. And so first thing I want you to work on is being absolutely clear. Clear is kind, right? Be explicit. Make sure you're working in simple terms. Don't be using idioms that they might not understand. So making sure that it is simple and clear to understand. The other thing that I would tell you to do is feedback loops, making sure that you have processes in place. Let's say you send them an email with a job that they're going to respond back to you that yes, it's been received. Then maybe they're going to paraphrase your email to make sure that they understand it, and that you have set up milestones for them to get back to you to make sure that they're not going down a rabbit hole you don't want them to go down. So making sure you're using feedback loops is the second piece of advice. And the third piece of advice to communicate clearly is make sure that you're using visual aids. Right? In today's day and age, you can record Zoom conversations, you can do screen shares, you can do screen captures, you can use videos, you can use all of these types of visual aids to make sure that your communication is clear and it's well understood. And it's also recorded so they can go back in case they understood it the first time, but maybe they forgot in the hustle and bustle of everything that's going on. And that gives them the opportunity to make sure that they're getting it right for you, because I can guarantee that the staff overseas is going to want to do a good job for you. But this clarity is kindness. Making sure that you're crystal clear in your communications will save you a ton of problems in remote staffing. So the fifth deadly sin of remote staffing is not having SOPs in place. And what are SOPs? Standard operating procedures. And many times we think, oh, I'll just give them a job, I'll shoot them an email, and maybe that will work for certain jobs. But if you want to have a job done and done right and done repeatedly in the same manner, it's important to have an SOP. It doesn't mean you actually need to create them. Maybe they create their own SOPs once you've given them a job, but it's definitely important that you review them, make sure that they're correct, and make sure that they've got everything understood in that SOP that you're needing moving forward. And even many times in our organizations, we have these exceptions to the rules. You're really going to need to make sure that you're understanding what those exceptions are in your organization and make sure they're communicated clearly, to go back to the previous principle, and that they're captured in the SOPs. Making sure that you have those SOPs is going to be critical to your success in remote staffing. So the sixth deadly sin of remote staffing is thinking that asynchronous work schedules can work. And what do I mean by asynchronous work schedules? It's that everybody works on their own time. If you go to work during the day, the person in India goes to work during the day as well, but they're 10 and a half hours ahead of us. So they can produce work while we're sleeping, and we wake up in the morning and all the work's done. Sounds fantastic, doesn't it? But the reality of the situation is you often give them a project, and if they get into it for an hour, and they're going to have a question for you. So they're sitting around for 7 hours not knowing what to do, and when you get in the morning, you're not happy because the project project's not done and you're behind. And so what I encourage everybody to do is when they first get into global remote staffing is making sure that you're working on the same time as your counterpart on the other side of the world and making sure that your timings match up. So in case they have a question, you can answer it in real time. And then over a period of time, after they understand your business, after they understand the way you like to work, you can test out an asynchronous work schedule and see if that works. And if it works for everybody, fantastic. But don't assume it can work if you can't make it work when you're on the same time schedule. So the seventh deadly sin of remote staffing is not allowing enough time to work through the problems. And I guarantee you there will be problems. If you have employees, you have problems, right? And so nobody goes, well, I had to fire somebody, I'm never hiring anybody again. But that often happens in remote staffing. They'll hire somebody overseas, say it didn't work out, and so I'm never doing that again. And I understand that desire, you don't want to go through that pain again, but I will tell you, you need to make sure that you have the right expectations when entering into a situation like this. You're never going to expect this to work out right the first time. If it works out, great, you'll work it in. But the reality of the situation is it's going to take time to work through the cultural implications, the work implications, the SOPs, understanding the communication strategies. And this might sound like a lot, and it can be, but the payoff can be huge and immense. And so I encourage you is make sure that if you're going to try this, that you're giving yourself time to have a few failures so that you can have the incredible successes that you know that this can bring about and you know that it can bring to your organization. So that's it, the 7 deadly sins of remote staffing. These aren't just pitfalls, these are vital lessons learned over decades of experience working in different cultures and contexts. And I hope that you've learned something from them today. But because I can guarantee you, if you take these to heart and you start your remote staffing journey, you're going to make sure that you take it from a so-so experience to an awesome experience when you make sure that you don't commit these 7 deadly sins. So if you want to start your remote staffing journey but aren't sure where to start, please give us a call. We'd love to have a consultation with you. We'd love to be able to share with you. Even if we're not the right company for you, we'll give you some tips and tricks that'll help take your remote staffing experience to the next level.